Hey there, Alex Kidman here, and today I'm taking a look at the Asus CX3402 Chromebook Plus, this large, very white chap you see in front of you here. Now, it's a Chromebook, but it's a Chromebook Plus, and if you're familiar with Chromebooks, you might be wondering what the Plus bit is all about. So Chromebook Plus is a designation that Google gives to a certain minimum spec for a Chromebook, and it's a minimum spec that's a fair bit higher than your classic Chromebooks had. Now, I'm no stranger to the Chromebook world. I've been using them on and off for years. Oh, look, here's a really cheap one that I bought for about $100 a few years ago. The CX3402 is a considerably more expensive beast. If you want one of these, it's going to run you, well, for this particular model here in Australia, just north of $1,000. Quite a bit more for a Chromebook, even if it is a Chromebook Plus. But should you bother? Well, look, short form, if you don't want to watch all the way through, I think this is a really, really good Chromebook. I think it delivers on a lot of the promises that Chromebooks were meant to give, and does so in a way that's really pleasing if, and the if here is a big one, if you're predominantly working in the Google ecosystem or with web-based apps. If you're doing that, this is a really, really good little productivity machine, but it is worth considering what you can get in a Windows laptop at that price point, because of course at around $1,000, you can start to get some really nice machines. So in design terms, look, you certainly can't miss the CX3402 with its all white plastic construction. Now, Asus says that it's mil-spec and robust. It certainly doesn't feel that way, I've got to say. It's not that it feels horrible and cheap, but it certainly feels plastic. It's very, very obviously plastic, and I do wonder how that all-white finish is going to look a few years down the track. My prior experience with white notebooks is often they don't age well. It measures in at 32.64 by 21.43 by 1.87 centimeters, with a carrying weight of 1.46 kilos, which is about average for a laptop in this size with a plastic body. The model, as tested, features a 14-inch 1920 by 1080 pixel LCD display. Asus's website does indicate the existence of a touchscreen-capable model, but as far as I can tell, that model's not for sale here in Australia. With a 16:9 aspect ratio screen, it does feel a little as though Asus has retrofitted existing consumer laptop designs around the CX3402, where 16:10 might be a little better suited to productivity work. It's also not particularly bright, only 250 nits, so less suitable perhaps if you have to work outdoors with it for any stretch of time. It's certainly not lacking in ports. There are dual USB 3.2 USB-C power delivery capable ports, one on each side, dual USB 3.2 USB-A ports on the right side, plus a combo headphone mic jack and full-sized HDMI 1.4 port. You very much could get by without a dock if you wanted to use this as your desk machine. But it will work with other docks. So I tested it out with a CalDigit Thunderbolt dock, and while it didn't recognize every single peripheral attached to it, and that's a limitation more, I suspect, of the way Chrome OS works, it had no issues picking up keyboard, mouse, monitor, Ethernet connection. They all just immediately fired up and started working as though they'd always been there, which is pleasing to see. If you're more looking to use the Asus CX3402 as a pure laptop, you'll be using its backlit keyboard and trackpad, and here I had a bit of a mixed experience. The keyboard, I think, is actually pretty good. It's got nice key travel, good response. It's backlit with only a couple of levels intensity, and to be honest, I touched up, so I don't really look that much. But you can always just go down to a straight black if you don't like backlit keyboards. And yes, before you ask, all of this review, all of this script was written on the CX3402 because that's all part of the testing regime around here. The trackpad that sits beneath it is mostly fine, but that's about as far as I'd go. Maybe it's the all-plastic construction, but giving it a slightly less than premium feel. Maybe it could do with being just a tad more responsive, but I absolutely did notice the difference switching to an external mouse from the trackpad every single time. Now, that's totally a personal taste observation. You might find it's perfectly fine for you. It's not bad or broken, but I felt like the keyboard was better than the trackpad in this instance. The Asus CX3402 also incorporates a 1080p webcam, which is a great inclusion in these days of so very many video conference meetings. You get a physical shutter on the side that also introduces a brief little note of colour, because when you close the shutter, you get this orange circle over where the shutter would be. It's cute. I mean, it's not essential. It could be any colour it like, but it's just cute. It's nice to have a bit of colour in an otherwise all-white landscape. So what about video quality and audio quality through the microphones? Well, this is through the Chromebook Plus, and look, it's not brilliant, but for video meetings and the like, it's perfectly serviceable. So what about performance? Well, look, the whole point of the Chromebook Plus idea is that it's built to a specification rather than just being built to a price point. So my old school Chromebook here, yeah, that was built to a price point. That was cheap, and it shows. And look, perfectly serviceable little word processor, but definitely with lots and lots of limitations. The CX3402 is produced in a variety of configurations, starting with Intel Core i3 processors, but the model Google Australia sent me for review was running off an Intel Core i5 1235U processor with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of onboard storage. Now that's not super high-end in the laptop world, but it's broadly appropriate for what you might see in a Windows laptop at this price range at the time of writing. What it does boil down to, though, is more about what you can actually do with a high-powered Chromebook, or what you can do better. So, for all the standard, really Google-centric tasks that you could do with a classic Chromebook, the Asus CX3402 really zips along well. It's a really pleasant device to use. Basically gone are the waiting times for Windows to draw, or internet connectivity permitting, web pages to load. Most apps respond fairly well, and you can just get about doing stuff in a way where, with prior Chromebooks, I've always tended to hit a big lag point. I've had a couple of smaller lag points with this, although to be fair to it, it's always kind of tricky with a Chromebook working out whether or not the lag you're experiencing is down to the Chromebook or down to your internet connection at that point in time. It's been a mix of both with this, but it's definitely been much zippier than other Chromebooks I've used in the past. Working across Google applications such as Docs is a joy here, and I can totally see the appeal if you're already seriously embedded in that kind of workspace. Chromebook startup is quick, the OS is largely secure, I mean, nothing is bulletproof, and it's ridiculously easy to just power wash the whole system and start again from scratch if you want or need to. Naturally, you're also agreeing to play in the Google ecosystem with all the tracking that involves, but then if that's not going to work for you, a Chromebook is never going to work for you. Now, the hardware underlying the Asus CX3402 makes for an interesting work companion. I can't quite do everything that I'd personally like to do the way that I do it on a Chromebook, but during my review period, I've certainly tried. So take, for example, video conferencing. While I've had this in for review, every video meeting I've done has been done on the Chromebook Plus, and it's worked really, really well across multiple platforms, across Zoom, across WebEx, across Google, of course. And I've even had respondents kind of comment that my camera looked really sharp. They noticed when I enabled effects like blur. All of that actually works really well. And the thing there is that in laptops, even at this price point, you don't always see 1080p cameras. Having that as a minimum spec gives us a lot of flexibility if you're that kind of remote worker, if you have to do a lot of those meetings and you just can't put up with those cruddy 720p cameras that are on so very many notebooks. And of course, Chromebooks aren't just tied into Chrome OS anymore, with the ability to run native Android apps. Now, this is something of a mixed bag, however, depending on the apps you choose to install. And look, I've noted this before with Google Android devices with larger displays, such as the Google Pixel tablet. Not all Android apps work well at 16:9 ratios or on larger screens, with often plenty of wasted white space or oddly sized inputs. Some apps outright just don't work at all, and developers can block access to the Chrome OS version of an app, even if you've purchased the corresponding Android app. Now, while it's not a serious work app, for example, Minecraft has a Chrome OS version, but it's separate to the Android version, even if you already own that, and you can't easily install the Android version onto the Chromebook, which feels a bit cheeky in a way. It's not all fun and games, of course. Google has put some effort into making Chromebook Plus models work with a variety of productivity apps, usually via their web app counterparts, including select Adobe apps and a couple of Chromebook Plus specific features. So you get custom wallpapers, you get, for example, the Magic Editor feature that you'd find on the Pixel 8 phones. And look, that works for object removal about as well as it does on the Pixel. So I'll throw up an example here of my cat. Now, let's say that I just wanted an exciting photo of carpet. Well, let's get the Magic Editor on the Chromebook to edit that out for us. And here we go. And Yeah, that's not a great result. It's very, very clearly been edited, but that is just the way for this kind of AI learning approach. Maybe over time that will get a little bit better, maybe it won't. And look, all of this boils down to a question of what you want a laptop for. Chromebooks are a good choice if you want a low-fuss, mostly managed solution because the underlying operating system controls what you can run to a level that's not the case on a corresponding Windows PC. And that does make it easier to maintain from a security perspective, far more focused just on that software it can run. That is, of course, a double-edged sword, however, because there's no doubting that what you can do with a Windows machine at this price point is significantly more expansive, even if that laptop might not be up to the task of running every Windows app at top speed. As noted, I did hit some intermittent lag on the Asus CX3402 during use, mostly when I had multiple apps open plus numerous Chrome tabs, but these were few and far between relative to what I might expect to see out of a Windows system. What about battery life? Well, the CX3402 runs off a sealed 50 watt-hour lithium-ion battery that Asus claims is capable of up to 10 hours of battery life. Now, up to figures are always rubbery, and this one gets tricky because there's not really a whole bunch of Chromebook-specific battery testing apps I can fall back on. Much more anecdotal testing in this case. So, for example, a 1-hour WebEx meeting drained the battery by about 20%, which suggests more like a 5-hour battery life. That'd be a bit disappointing, although a 5-hour meeting I think would also just kill me. Ugh. That being said, in more day-to-day use, I've more seen kind of the 6 to 8 hour range as being about typical for this device. You could certainly probably stretch it up to 10 depending on what you're doing with it. When it comes time to charge it, you've got those dual USB-C ports, one on each side, and Asus provides a 45 watt USB PD charger in the box. It's a nice little compact unit, and of course it's got the benefit that virtually everything is USB-C these days for power, so you can charge up a lot of other gadgets when you're not charging up the Chromebook Plus. So final conclusions. I rather like what the Asus CX3402 is trying to do here. If your workflow lives and breathes within the Google ecosystem, or you're predominantly working with web-based apps anyway, there's a lot of appeal in a simple to configure, easy to reset system that responds well, and that's precisely what you get here. However, I can't ignore the fact that this does run north of $1,000 as tested, and at that price you have a lot of Windows options to consider as well. Most Windows systems at this price point might not be quite as responsive, and there's always issues around security and updates to consider. But the flip side there is that they're also considerably more flexible in terms of the applications you can install and run on them.